Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Bass Tales. And today we're going to talk about a man that came up with a great company and a great lure design. And this lure might be considered the best soft plastic bass bait of all time, or maybe even the best largemouth bass fishing lure of all time. His name is Gary Yamamoto, and he came up with the Senko, the original stick bait. And we're going to go and talk a little bit about his history, and then we're going to talk about why the Senko is the best, or maybe the best, soft plastic bait of all time, and some little tips on the lure, how to use it. Before we get into the main story here, I just want to talk about an article that came out recently. In our last podcast, we talked about vacationing and traveling, fishing. Recently, I saw an article from Bass Association, and it listed the top 10 lakes for bass fishing. So I figured I'd go down that list for you guys. So if anyone was listening to the last podcast and planning on doing a fishing trip or traveling, maybe that one of these lakes will be a good idea for you in the future, then go try out fishing. So this is a top best bass lakes of 2024 by Bassmaster. Number 1 would be the St. Lawrence River in New York. It's the eastern side of Ontario Lake, and it's a great smallmouth spot to fish. Number 2 would be O.H. Ivory Lake in Texas, known for its big largemouth. Number 3 would be Orange Lake in Florida, also known as a big largemouth lake. Number 4 would be Lake St. Clair in Michigan for big smallmouth. Number 5 would be Lake Fork, Texas, another good largemouth lake. Number 6 would be Lake Murray in South Carolina. Number 7 would be Lake Erie, Upper Niagara River in New York, another smallmouth lake. Number 8 would be Clear Lake in California. Number 9 would be Busey Break Reservoir in Louisiana. We're mentioning this one because it just had a 15.78 pound largemouth taken this year. There's a chance of getting some big largemouth out of that lake. Last but not least, number 10 would be Mealy Larks Lake in Minnesota, another smallmouth lake, and also some good northern pike fishing out of there, I believe, as well. That's 10 ideas if you're going to take a vacation, looking to do a fishing trip somewhere. So those are some good spots to check out. Now let's just get into our main topic today. So Gary Yamamoto is the man that came up with the Senko, and also some other baits as well. And a lot of people think Gary Yamamoto is from Japan. Gary Yamamoto Baits is a Japanese company. It has a little bit of history with Japan, but Gary Yamamoto is not Japanese. He is American. His parents were Japanese immigrants that went to Hawaii to make some extra money and to eventually go back to their home country of Japan. But Gary was born in Hawaii and is American. His parents are Japanese. So a lot of people think he is Japanese. Nope, he is a Japanese American. And also, his baits are all made in Arizona. They are an American-made product by hand, and it's not a Japanese company. But when we get into his story a little bit, you'll see it has some influence from Japan, because Japan had a big following with his company. So a lot of people think it's a Japanese company because it was more popular in Japan before it became more popular in the US. His story basically starts, he was born in Hawaii, and when he was young, his parents had a farm in Hawaii, and he'd go around and move plant pots and rocks and find worms and go fishing. That's kind of how his love first started with fishing. When he was a little kid, preschool age, just fishing in Hawaii. Don't know what really he was catching over there. I don't know if they have largemouth bass in Hawaii. That's a good question. I don't think they have them in Alaska, and I think they are in Hawaii, though. But he was over there fishing, maybe just catching little sunfish, stuff like that when he was a little kid. That's how most of us start. When he got older, he wanted to go to college, and he moved out to California to go to college. While he was started college, the Vietnam War was really ramping up, and they started the draft. And he didn't want to go and get drafted, because if you got drafted, basically you were put as a grunt right at the front lines and getting shot at. Instead of getting shot at and having a college education started, he was like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to join the services. So he joined the Air Force and did 4 years in the Air Force so he wouldn't have to get shot at. So he did his 4 years in the Air Force, a veteran of Vietnam. And then after that, he went back to LA to finish out his college degree. And he ended up getting married and having 2 little boys. But he didn't want to raise them in the city of Los Angeles. So he started looking for a piece of property or a new place. And he wanted to start his own business. So he found this piece of property over in Page, Arizona. And what happened is he got his property in California went up $30,000. So he had some money to play with. So he ended up using that money from the growth of his property in California to buy this piece of property in Page, Arizona. He ended up turning it into a campground. And this campground was right next to Lake Powell. And at the time, it was an up-and-coming fishing hotspot for bass. It was created a little bit over a decade earlier when the U.S. government dammed up the Colorado River with the Glen Canyon Dam. This is where a lot of these great bass fishing lakes come from, is these reservoirs that are dammed up rivers. So he ended up moving out to Page, Arizona, and living in this little A-frame house on this piece of property, and ended up paving out and making his campground. He ended up buying a little boat and started fishing at Lake Powell, and got really his love back for fishing, since he hadn't really fished too much since being a little kid, and loved bass fishing. So when he got his campground up and running, gotten some money coming in from there, he decided he'd start a little bait and tackle shop in the little A-frame house, start selling fishing lures to the people camping and fishing bait. That's kind of how he got his start into it. He fell in love with fishing again, and then he started a little tackle shop at his campground. He loved fishing grubs. Grubs were very popular in these early 1970s. They're like kind of the hot lure of the time. They kind of faded a little bit in the last couple of years, but grubs are great little fishing lures. And they work on largemouth, as we see here, as we're talking about. Lake Powell's known for largemouth, and they're awesome smallmouth lure. So what happened is he was fishing Mr. Twisties, which was the original grub. And they only made 3 colors. They made a black, a white, and a chartreuse. And he knew of this other guy, Gene LaRue, and he had a lure company. And why Gary Yamamoto liked his so much is that he impregnated his plastic baits with salt. Gary really believed in having this salt impregnated into the plastic. Because if you think about it, when something bites into something, the blood has that salty taste to it. So when the fish would take the plastic bait, bite on it, and taste that salt, it would more of a chance the fish would hold on to it than something that wasn't impregnated with salt. They would spit it out faster. So you have much more time to set the hook. Gary, being the smart guy he is, he wanted to make sure his lures would have salt. So he went to LaRue at the time, and I don't know if he just wanted just enough to sell in his tackle shop, but he called LaRue up and said, hey, I want you to make these different colors that I can't find in grubs for me. And LaRue was like, sure, you can do that, but you have to buy 5,000 of each color. That's a lot to buy and spending some money. He really wanted to use these lures. He had a good feeling about these colors were going to work better than the black, white, and the chartreuse colors. I think he had kind of like a pepper flake color and some other ones. I couldn't find too much on it. He knew that this clear water that they had at Lake Powell, bass are very visual, and the colors, I think they do matter. The colors, changing up the colors in different colors. So he really wanted to do it. So he ended up buying 5,000 of these few different colors he wanted from Gene LaRue of these grubs. And also kind of at the same time, there was this other company called Twin Tees out of California, and they were making these things called the double tail skirts that were like kind of like a skirt that you would see on like a spinnerbait or a jig, but it was like a soft plastic, not that like rubber band type stuff you see on them nowadays. And people would put those on the hooks and then also put on like a grub or a worm just to dress it up a little more. He started to think about buying those skirts, and he was selling those probably out of his tackle shop. He started having him make that color skirt to match his color grubs. And what he did was he took a soldering iron and started basically melting the two together and making one lure. And that's where his first lure came from. And this was in the early 80s he started this. And that was called the hula grub. And that's how he came up with that first lure design. And it worked really well. Basically, in 1983, he started Gary Yamamoto Custom Baits, and his first lure was the hula grub. And they still make them to this day. They just get overshadowed by the Senko of the time now. So he had this little hula grub, which was a grub with a skirt on it. No one else had one like this. They were like a two-piece thing as before in different colors that no one had. And he was just selling them in his store and different anglers. And he had so many of them, he needed more of a market for it. So he had to do some advertising. And he put an ad in Western Outdoor News at the time, which was like a fishing outdoor magazine. And he got contacted by a Japanese distributor, seeing his name, Gary Yamamoto, knowing it's a Japanese name. In Japan at the time, they only really had hard baits. They didn't really have like a soft plastic type baits like we had in the United States with the worms and the grubs. So they ended up going into business with him as a distributor and started ordering hula grubs and selling them in Japan. And they were very popular in Japan. And Japan just started blowing up with bass fishing basically within the last 10 years. It got really popular. So he started selling these hula grubs over in Japan. And there was also kind of a following. He pushed it a little bit in like the western part of the country. People were buying his lures in the western country. But basically for his first 10 years of business there, 90% of his business was in Japan and not the U.S. Japan was his moneymaker at the very beginning. He was making some money. He was running his campground, selling these to distributors in Japan, doing all right for himself, and he loved fishing. So he started getting into pro bass fishing. He started fishing in the Bassmaster series. He started there in 1988, and he ended up fishing the Bassmaster series off and on from 1988 to 2016. He competed in 86 tournaments. He ended up placing 5 top 10s, and he had 2 Bassmaster Classic appearances, which is pretty neat because that's like the Super Bowl of bass fishing. He ended up making $171,000, a little over $171,000 in his pro Bassmasters tournament series. He also fished a little bit in the FLW and the MLF pro fishing tournaments. He did about 182 of those, it looks like, and he ended up placing in the top 10 8 times, and he made about $568,000, a little over $568,000 doing those fishing tournaments. So he was really into fishing. He loved doing the tournament fishing. He loved the recreational fishing. He made lures. He sold lures himself out of his tackle shop, which is this little A-frame building that was on this piece of property that he turned into a little tackle shop, and they lived in there at the very beginning too. You know, this is like these are the stories that I love, these self-made entrepreneurs, and he has a little piece of everything. So he had a lot accomplished from the mid-70s to the early 80s. He was really doing well for himself. But it really didn't take off until he came out with the Senko lure. What happened, how he came up with the Senko lure, he was actually fishing the Bassmasters tournament in Florida. And this lure at the time that was really popular, and I remember fishing them as my kid, and I can agree with what Gary says, that the Sluggo was an awesome lure. And when he was out fishing it, he was fishing in Florida, maybe it was Lake Okeechobee, I didn't see where exactly he was fishing it, but everyone was using these sluggos, and he'd cast it out, and he'd miss so many bites because these lures use like a very hard rubber, not like a softer rubber like you see on a Senko or a lot of the other lures we have today. So the bass would take it, you'd go to set the hook, it wouldn't come through the rubber to get the lip of the bass, and you'd lose a lot of fish. So he's like, I can come up with a lure that's a softer version of a soft jerkbait. Because basically that's what it was, like a fluke style soft jerkbait. Zoom makes the flukes now. So this soft jerkbait, the Sluggo, is basically the originator of that. And he's like, I can make a softer version where you won't lose the fish. When you set the hook, it'll come out of the plastic. He already knew how to make lures. So he went home and started messing around with this. And this is 1996. And he made the first mold. It says he was writing on a board, coming up with designs for this new Sluggo style lure that would be softer. And says he came up with it from like a Bic pen, the look of a Bic pen. I think the Sluggo looks more like a Sharpie and not a Bic pen. Maybe I read it wrong, but I would say it looks like a Bic pen, a Sharpie, not a Bic pen. He was drawing up the designs, and he wanted to make that new soft twitch bait, soft jerk bait. When he did the mold, and he actually sent one of his employees out, who was a German immigrant that worked for him, and he took out the prototype to try it out, which is kind of weird. I don't know why he didn't go out and try it out by himself at first. Maybe he was busy that day, but maybe this guy really just wanted to try first. So he gave it, and he came back and said, this isn't like a power fishing, like twitch bait Sluggo. He's like, you just cast it out and just let it drop slow and hit the bottom and fish it real slow. He said basically on the slow drop, he said he was catching bass amazingly on this product. So Gary was like, well, that's not really what I wanted to make. I wanted to make a soft jerkbait, something that worked like the Sluggo. So he went out and tried it out. And his first cast with it, he was sight fishing and saw a bass on a bed. And he casted 5 feet past the bed, a bad cast. And he said it hit the water, and he watched the bait go down, and that bass left the bait 5 feet away, which doesn't happen very often. And he went and grabbed that worm. So he knew he had something special on his hands at this time. He knew this was catching fish. His employee that took it out said it was an awesome lure. So he ended up making this lure and realized it was something very special, and how bass could not seem to resist this lure. He ended up having his son come up with the name, and his son came up with the name Senko. In Japanese, it translates to flash. That's what Senko means, is basically flash in Japanese. He started kind of pushing this product around, and this is where it really started taking off in the U.S. People started fishing tournaments with this thing, and recreational anglers, and just saw how good this lure would catch fish, how fish could not resist this lure. It was just, really, it's kind of funny because he didn't design it to do this, but the way he made the plastic and the salt content and how the dense it was, it's the way it would drop in the water, the way it wiggles, basically the way it sinks. It sinks slowly and kind of has like a twitch to it. The bass can't resist it. It hits like a natural instinct to basically attack this bait and eat it. This is 1996, and it took off pretty quick because you started seeing a lot of tournament anglers and other enthusiasts just started picking it up, and it had a cult following in the western part of the country real quick. And by the late 90s, the Senko was the go-to presentation for all anglers across the U.S. and Japan. So this is where Gary Yamamoto baits really took off in the U.S. and it totally switched around. And I think after this, basically the U.S. was now maybe actually selling more than Japan for him. He was still selling a lot in Japan, but this Senko took off in the U.S. Nothing like the Hula Grub ever did. So he had a great product on his hands. And anyone that's fished a Senko knows how well they work. It's so simple to fish. Even Gary himself says you just basically got to fish it slow. It's all a finesse style. And a lot of bass fishermen, they love the power fish. Just throw it out, crank it back, throw it out, crank it back. So that's not how you fish it. You throw it out, you just let it sink slow, basically bounce it off the bottom, bring it back to your boat, and it takes a little bit of time. So some people, I'm consider myself finesse fisherman. I enjoy just slowly fishing it. Everyone wants to throw out something and just crank that reel back and forth, back and forth. But there's something that you need the patience. You need to relax and throw out a sluggo, and it's finesse. A lot of times it hit the water, and on the way down, you don't even have to do anything, and the bass will just pick it up. That's what Gary would say. You just throw it out, let it sink, slowly reel it back to you. And it works. The bass cannot resist this lure. If you noticed, I noticed like about a year ago that the Gary Yamamoto bait lure packages started to change. And some people were thinking that the worms themselves changed too, and they're not the same as they used to be. What happened is in 2021, a company called GSM Outdoors bought Gary Yamamoto baits. They bought them for $325 million. That's how much these Gary Yamamoto baits are worth. And it's crazy how much this little company grew into something so much bigger. Now they carry so much different lures, and they had that value. So this company, GSM Outdoors, is out of Irving, Texas. And a lot of you guys might not have heard of them unless you're a hunter. They're big into like hunting products. They do like tree stands and stuff like that for hunters and stuff with firearms. So a lot of the people that worked over this company are avid fishermen and were excited that they were bringing on finally like a fishing line to their company. GSM bought the product, but it is still made in the Gary Yamamoto warehouses and factories. It's made by the same people by hand in the U.S. Same rubber to salt content. So the worms had not changed. A lot of people think because the package changed, maybe it changed. They were just freshening up the package, and maybe they wanted kind of their own little take on what the packaging should look like, because the Gary Yamamoto package was the same for years. So this threw a little bit of people off. At first, I thought they might have been a different product as well, and because I saw them first change at Walmart, and I'm like, well, why is it a blue and black package? It used to be like a green package, and so I kind of did a little research into that. They did end up selling out to another company. And that's kind of sad that it did sell out. But Gary Yamamoto said he is going to stay on and still help promote the product for GSM. And it still has his name on it. So he wants that product to stay good. He got up to there and sold it. I think he was like in his late 80s. And he just figured it was the time to do it. He has his ranch that he has in Texas now with his own ponds that I think you can actually rent time over there. I think he maybe has like a little hotel or cabins you can stay at and fish at his ponds over in Texas. And he's into that now. And I think he's still doing some actual tournament fishing as well. So I guess it was just time for him basically to move on from running a company which had multiple warehouses and all this. But the thing that makes these, so let's get into why the Senko is so much better than these knockoffs. So first of all, it's like a secret formula for this rubber, plastic content to salt. I think that's the trick here with it. So when they make the Gary Yamamoto Senkos, and I think maybe some other of their products, for every 4 pounds, they use 4 pounds of salt for every gallon of plastic, which is a lot of salt. And if you ever looked at these Gary Yamamotos, they're loaded with salt. It's like the secret, like Coca-Cola's secret recipe. They do not release this. They don't, want anyone else going and making it. And since the Senko came off, there's been over 50 knockoffs of this. Basically, every single company out there makes a Senko knockoff. You got like the Berkeley General. You got the Yum Dinger. You got I forget the other one. Strike King has one. Everyone has a stick bait Guggen. A lot of them look almost like the Yum Dinger looks identical to the Senko. But I'll tell you one thing, it isn't a Senko. I bought a pack and it looked just like Senko's, and you throw it out, it does not catch the fish as well as the Senko. You have, I would say, if you throw out a Yum Dinger or you're going to throw out the Senko, you're going to have a hook out rate at least 3 times more with a Senko. I would say that. I would put my rep on that. It doesn't have the same drop. If you actually look up, there's this guy on YouTube. His name's Steve Rogers. I really like this guy's videos. He does like 5-minute videos, and he'll do like underwater comparisons of different products and other things too. The guy's a real smart guy. I think he's a pro fisherman. I don't know too much about him, but I started following him on YouTube. Steve Rogers Outdoors. Seems like a really cool guy. I'd like to meet him someday. So he did this comparison with the different stick baits to see how much they compared to the Senko, and he filmed it on the water with them dropping in the wacky rig style and see how much basically vibration and flutter they had dropping in the water. When he threw out like the Yum Dinger, it was one of the worst. And a lot of people say, oh, buy the Yum Dingers because they're like half the cost and they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. They basically, when you throw it out, it sinks. It doesn't have any vibration to it. It doesn't move at all. It just kind of drops straight down, which, not saying it wouldn't catch fish, but it doesn't have that motion like the Senko. I would say the one that looked like it was the closest was the Berkeley General. The Berkeley General, probably the biggest difference between that is they're probably using the power bait smell to it, and I don't think they use salt in theirs. I haven't looked at the Generals myself because, I know the Senkos work and I'm going to stick to them. I like to stick to the people that create the products. A lot of times I stick with the originators, but those might be maybe the best ones that are out there for knockoffs is maybe the Berkeley Generals, but I don't know too much about it, and I love the Senkos, so I'm sticking with the Senkos. Maybe one day I will pick up a pack and try the Generals because I do like the Berkeley products. I'm going to get into where I basically realized the Senko as a young adult. So I think it was the early 2000s. I was at a lake, and these guys were fishing all day, and they came in, and I was talking to them, and I was like, what are you guys using? And he's like, Gary Yamato's. And I'm like, who's Gary Yamamoto? Is this some new type of lure? Who are they? And the guy's like, hey, I'll give you a couple. And he basically opened a Gary Yamamoto bag and threw a couple worms in there and a couple other his lures. It might have been like a hula grub and like there was like a frog. I can't remember exactly. But he's like, no, use these Senkos. These are great. And here's a couple other lures. And I was like looking at it, and I'm like, oh, this is some like new product from Japan or something. This is early 2000. He gives me the hooks, and they were like the 3/0 extra wide hooks. And he's like, oh yeah, you just ring it Texas rig. And I'm like, oh, you need like a bullet weight or something. Because at the time I was fishing like the curly tailed like zoom lures and or ribbon tail or whatever you want to call it, zoom lures and power baits. That's kind of what I was fishing back then. The lizards, stuff like that, grubs, and then obviously like crankbait, stuff like that. I never seen a stick bait. I'm like looking at it, I'm like, this thing doesn't have any movement to, like, how does this thing catch anything? But he's like, no, they really catch really well. So I was like, okay. So I took the pack, and I don't even think I rigged it up that quick. And I just remember him saying, you don't have to put a weight on it. I'm like, that's weird, because I always, had the bullet weight on those other worms, because you couldn't cast it very far without the bullet weight. It was just not heavy enough. I'm looking at this fat worm with this big ass hook, and I'm fishing up north here, and the bass ain't that big, and I'm like, can they even get this huge hook in their mouth or this worm? I'm like, well, one day I went out and I think the fish weren't biting. I was fishing with either like a power bait or a zoom or whatever, and I couldn't get any bites. And I'm like, screw it. Let's try this weird looking turd of a worm. Really, what it looked like. So I tied on that big 3/0 extra wide hook, Texas rigged it, no weight, and threw it out there. And sure enough, I started catching some fish. And I'm like, man, there is something behind this bait. Didn't know too much about it, but it did work. I'm like, this is pretty neat. I'm like, Japanese are smart. Maybe they did come up with this new worm design that looks like nothing but does something. I knew it definitely was a good lure. Didn't know too much at the time, but I ended up fishing with them off and on through the years. And now it's probably 70% of the time, it's probably the soft bait I go to is that Senko. It just works so well, and it's so easy to fish. And it's funny because people almost say it's like if you wacky rig a Senko, then you're cheating because it works so well. It's kind of silly. Like, come on, you can't say it's cheating because it works so good. But that's what some people will say when you fish it. You go in any fishing tournament, I bet you check any boat with these guys that have 10 rods out, and if out of their 10 rods, I bet you there's a Senko or a knockoff Senko on every pro fisherman's rod. So it works. The Senko is great. That's my little history of how I started fishing with the Senko. To this day, I use them, and when I take my kids out fishing, that's what I throw on their rods, because that thing will cast a mile. It's by itself, it weighs like a quarter of an ounce, and the way it casts, I've never seen a plastic lure cast as good as a Senko worm. And that makes a big difference where I fish a lot of times. It's very clear water, and getting that worm as far away from the boat as possible makes a big difference. So I'll take my kids out fishing, my younger kids, and when I had my older kids and they were younger, I like it because it's just one hook. I don't like them fishing when they're young and not knowing, especially when there's two of them in a boat. I don't want them to use anything with like treble hooks or an exposed hook, because it's easier to hook someone in the face or something like that. So I take them out, I Texas ring them up, no weight or nothing, and just weightless Texas rig that Senko up, and they'll catch fish. I just tell them to throw it out there, kind of let it sink, and just reel it slow, and they catch fish left and right, and they love it. So it's a great lure for a beginner to fish with. If you have no skills fishing, you want to take out your new girlfriend, she's never fished before, or whatever, a friend that's never fished before. Throw on the Senko, let them catch some stuff. You're going to catch stuff. It's a lure, it's so good, you can fish it pretty much year around. It's always going to catch fish. And going back to that salt, I think that's the key, is that mixture of that salt to that rubber. What happened is when they came up with these Senkos, or it might have been right before, Gary Yamamoto ended up buying, going back to that Twin Tees company, he ended up getting the skirts from. They ended up going out of business in the 1980s, and that's when he really took off, and he bought that company and really got into it. At first, he was buying plastic from California, and it was the salt in it and stuff. And I don't know if he was mixing it, his own creation, until he started buying his own gear a few years later. And then he got some specialized equipment. And I don't know if it was from that Twin Tees or someone else in California that originally had it, but he modified a few things, and he gets that calculation perfect. That's what gives that creative, just let it sink, and it will wiggle and sink that way that fish can't resist it. One negative of this highly dense, very salty worm is they're not as durable as something that's not loaded with salt or designed that way. They're probably one of the least durable plastics. Usually after a couple fish, they'll end up ripping at the tip. So I have some, pointers to this for the Senko. There's not many cons, but one of them is the durability, and they cost more than the others. The cost is worth it. They're going to catch more fish than the other worms, and it's not that much of a cost. Yeah, maybe the Yum Dingers may be almost half the cost. It isn't as good, plain and simple. Not the crap on the Yum baits, but, if you want a better chance of catching a fish, you want to put that Senko on, pay a little bit extra money. And the durability. You know, you can go through a pack of Senkos one day fishing easily. They rip apart pretty quick. But I got some pointers. So a few weeks ago, I went out fishing, and I was fishing the Senko, and it was a hot day, and it's one of these days that was perfect for a Senko. The fish are lazy, and I'm fishing, and I end up ripping up the tip of it where I went in Texas rigged it, and I was like, crap, I'm gonna have to get rid of it. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna try something different. I never tried this, and I can vouch this works. So next time you're fishing with the Senko and it gets ripped up, go in through the tail and Texas rig it through the tail. Sure enough, the second I did that, I was out maybe I was like 10 or 15 casts in, and I caught an over a 4-pound largemouth. So I know it works. Maybe it was just because the way it sinks a little different than the usual way it's rigged or anything, but I thought that was kind of neat. I'm like, hey, I rigged it through the other way. So don't toss them right after it rips up like that. And definitely don't toss them out of the boat. Make sure you go home and throw these away. And I said this in one of the other podcasts, that when people throw these Senkos, they're so loaded with the salt and they're so resistible to bass that they'll just gobble these things up right off the rocks, and then they'll get stuck in their stomachs. They can't digest them, and it'll eventually kill the fish. There've been scientists that have cut open largemouth bass and fishermen, and they see they're loaded with Senkos, and the fish is all skinny and basically starving to death. So make sure you do take home those ripped up Senkos and dispose of them properly. But here's another tip. If you ever heard of the Ned rig, which is basically a little cut in half Senko, if your head rips up, save the rip worm. Go home, chop it in half, put them in a bag. There you go. You have a bunch of Ned style worms to use on a jig head and have a Ned rig. It's a perfect little for finicky largemouth when they're not biting, or if you have smallmouth that you fish for, a perfect lure for smallmouth. So basically, you can get a couple uses out of these, even though they're not as durable. You can cut them in half, turn them into Ned rigs, or flip them around and Texas rig it through the tail section. So, yep, that's the only negatives of these, as people say, is the durability, and you hear that, but it's the way the worm works underwater. It's just one of the side effects. It's loaded with salt, and it's less rubber and more salt than the other lures, so it doesn't last as long. But it's going to catch you more fish. Fish hold on to it longer. You know, the fish will friggin' eat it if you don't set the hook quick enough. So you basically, Gary Yamamoto says, if you cast it out, just let the fish take it. Watch your line. You don't even have to really set the hook that hard. You can almost like just turn the reel, as he says, and you're going to get that fish because they hold it so hard in their mouth. There's a couple tips on that. So it's not much for a Senko basically to learn how to fish these bad boys. It's just basically fishing slow, finesse style, and it's so simple. Like I said before, my favorite way to fish these is Texas rigging it without a weight. And that's also funny because that's Gary Yamamoto's favorite way of rigging it. Probably nowadays the most popular is the wacky rig, where you hook it through the middle, you can use a rubber band or just go through the plastic. And people swear by this wacky rig. I've done it a few times. It's not my favorite way to fish it. I just grew up fishing Texas style, so I just like that way. You can also do like a shaky head style. You can drop shot it, which is you probably want to use like a smaller size Senko. You can Carolina rig it. You can Ned rig it, like I said, where you cut the worm in half. Basically, there's so many different ways you can use it, just like any other soft plastic. So it's all different rigging styles, and the thing just plain out catches fish. And that's why you have over 50 different knockoffs, and every company makes their own version of this Senko stick bait. But they still have, and I still think the Senko is the number one and the best, and that is why it is known as probably the best soft plastic bait for largemouth and smallmouth fishing. I'll give you one more story, how irresistible this thing is. So I'm out in the kayak, and this is probably over a month ago. So I cast out a Senko, and I can't remember if my phone, I was picking up my phone because someone was calling me, or I had my other rod for some reason. I was changing a lure and I just casted it out, and my kayak was just floating, and that lure was out there. All of a sudden, it's probably out there a minute, and the movement of the kayak, the Senko must have been on the rocks on the bottom and just moving along. I nailed a huge, good-sized smallmouth. So I can't even take credit for that. It was just the kayak moving and pulling the worm along the bottom. So there's basically anyone can fish these. There's almost no skill to it. Just fish it slow. Let it kind of bounce along the bottom. You could cast it out and almost like troll it with just in a kayak, and let it just, the wind blow you around and troll it across the bottom, and you'll catch fish with it. So Gary Yamamoto, he came up with this great design. It was kind of by accident, but he didn't change it. He instead of going back to the drawing board and making something that competed as a soft jerkbait with the Sluggo, he stuck to that because he knew he had something on his hands that was so good. And it is sad that he kind of sold the company out in 2001, not 2001, 2021. He sold it out, but this company, the GSM, seems like a great company. And the worm is the same. The packaging changed, but it is the same Senko it always was. It's made in the same factory with the same secret recipe of rubber and salt. It's a great, great lure that everyone should have a few different Senkos in a few different colors. And they're handmade in the U.S., and they're great. I can't say enough that it might be the best largemouth bass fishing lure of all time, to tell you the truth. That might be my opinion on it, and a lot of other people's opinions. So if you've never tried a Senko, go out there and get a few packs and try it out. If you're doing yum dingers and not getting too much with it because someone told you they're the same, they're not the same. Go out there and, trust me, get a few packs of your favorite colors and you're going to catch fish. And I gave you a few tips on there how to use it and how to reuse it, so don't worry about that durability, because if you do what I said and you use it a couple different ways, flip it around or cut it in half, you're going to get your monies out of these things. So yeah, that's about it. So that's my story of Gary Yamamoto, or his story I should say, or my telling of his story. A great guy. I'd like to meet him someday. A very smart businessman. Very good to hear these type of stories. And yeah, so you guys get out there, get a couple packs of Senkos, make sure they're the Gary Yamamoto stick bait Senko, not a knockoff, and get out there, try it Texas style, without a weight, just weightless, and just throw it out there and just wait for those bites. You guys will catch some great fish on it, some big fish, and it'll also catch some little fish too. But get out there, get some fishing in. You guys all have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of this summer, and I'll be back with another episode within a couple weeks. Have a great one. Bye-bye.